your highest cost as a trucking company is going to be your driver pay. And then close behind, you've got insurance, and then you've got fuel, and then you've got equipment. And depending on how you structure your business, those four are still the top four, no matter if you have one truck or if you have 1,000.
Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. We are proudly presented by SPI Logistics, and I am your host, Blythe Brumleve. Today we have Jake Battles. He is the VP of Business Development and Sales over at REPOWR, and we're going to be talking all about trailers and how they should never be an excuse to say no to freight opportunities. Jake, you actually put that in our pre-show calendar booking notes, and I thought that was a perfect opening line. So thank you and welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Now, before I hit record, we started getting into a really good discussion about public speaking, and that's the number one fear, I think, across the world is public speaking, but you have no qualms with it. And why is that?
Well, in undergrad, I was taking an intro to communications course, and my intro professor just kind of when we were getting started was like, for every assignment, you can either elect to write a paper or you can do a speech. As long as that you're answering the questions, you can choose. And I've just, either out of opportunistic luck or laziness or procrastination or a combination of all three, I was like, man, a speech just seems so much easier than sitting down in a dorm room or a computer lab in the early 2000s and writing a paper. And so ever since then, I got fascinated about dialect and rhetoric. I was fortunate enough in undergrad to be during the 2008 election. And so I was in a debate class. I got to study the presidential debates as they were happening. And we had to watch and take notes, and we would go to class, and our professor would assign the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate, which at the time was McCain and Obama. And so then you would have to debate the points in real time, which was pretty fun. But yep, I studied public speaking and social influence in college. And then I've been a DJ for 20 years now. That's what I used to do to help pay my way through college. And so I've done sports announcing, radio work, DJ work. And so I really just dove headfirst into the deep end when it comes to public speaking.
And for folks who may not be aware, what are some of maybe like the high level rules, maybe do's and don'ts of public speaking?
Pauses are your friend, especially dramatic pauses, pausing for effect. That what I just did with filler words, those are what get in your mind when you try to navigate your thoughts and when you're trying to think and speak in real time, making sure that you enunciate your words, you speak clearly. Something my dad used to say was always to sit up straight, speak with your chest, make sure the people in the back of the room can hear you. But from a high level, it was really about keeping your points crisp and clear. And once you were complete, you just stop.
I love that. See, I was waiting for the dramatic pause there too. I wasn't sure if it was a dramatic pause or the stop, but that was a really good segue into my next question, because now I'm wondering, how has this helped you in the sales and logistics side of things? I imagine it's helped you a ton.
Early on in my logistics career, when I was getting started in brokerage, what it really helped me understand was when you're negotiating, just rates, if you could get on the phone and you could just ask for a rate and stop and let the person you were negotiating with, your customer, give you the feedback before you talked yourself out of a sale or, conceded too early, that really helped. But later in my career, as we got into more the enterprise sales and the higher level sales, it was really about speaking short, concise, asking a lot of questions, and then just stopping and being able to filter the answers as they came back. And what I have found as a segue into REPOWR as well is, if you can get your contact prospect to actually talk to you about their challenges and problems, that is like 80% of the battle. You can prospect, you can cold email, you can cold call all day, every day. But until you have a prospect or a contact that's willing to actually talk to you about the problems that they're experiencing, it sort of gives you insight enough to really be able to take some notes and identify the best places to bring some value with whatever you're trying to sell. If it's moving freight, if it's trailers, if it's software, all of those things have to start with a solution to a problem. And if your prospect isn't in a position to even communicate a problem, then there's no reason for you to try to sell anything.
And do any of those strategies or tips change in sort of the broadcasting world? Because you said you've done some radio broadcasting as well. Curious if
Mm-hmm.
that changes the communication strategy at all.
Well, in radio broadcasting, what was wild, and my experience in broadcasting was very minimal. I did voiceover work and I did some interviews and things like that, but it's very rare that any of that stuff is live anymore. I mean, when I was working with Kiss FM in North Carolina, um, I spoke with Andy, who was a high school friend of mine, who was doing an actual on-air personality, and I DJ'd some fundraisers for them, and I did some promo work with her. And it was like at 2:30 on a Thursday afternoon that we were recording a bit that was going to be played on Saturday morning, right? And so the back and forth internally in the studio continued to be valuable, but the the actual like engagement of trying to sound interesting and personable into a microphone when no one is there just blew my mind. Because for people who work in broadcasting, and based on the conversations we've had prior to this, I know you have experience in this world too, trying to have that conversational tone when you're looking at a lens is substantially more difficult than people give you credit for. That's why they say you're supposed to put a mirror in front of you if you can, so at least you're looking at yourself.
Yeah, a lot of people, especially guests that come on the pod, they are very, very nervous, especially for a lot of folks in logistics, because they're starting to do more interviews, but a lot of higher up executives just haven't been accustomed to that type of media training. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to have a really high profile guest on, and then they're
Stop it.
so nervous about how it sounds afterwards. They don't want to listen to it. They think their answers sound dumb, and I have to go through a little bit of reassurance to tell them, no, you sound good. It sounds like a conversation, and that's all I'm trying to have with these
Yeah,
kind of conversations.
absolutely. I did a bit with What the Truck and Dooner a couple weeks ago, and he is a machine. Okay. Like, I've done this a fair amount in my career, but the cadence and speed of which he speaks, it doesn't sound as intimidating when you're watching him live or when you're listening to him. But when you're there in the studio sitting next to him, I was like, man, you are ripping and roaring up here. And I had those same thoughts because my wife and some of my coworkers had listened and they're like, oh, you were great. It was awesome. And I was like, I thought I was just playing catch up the entire time because he was rattling off and he was so well enunciated too, which again, looking back at it retroactively, I was like, man, it does not seem nearly as fast paced on the air as it does in person, because I was, again, just kind of stunned by how well spoken and how his cadence and how his vernacular and everything was so well and tight and well done, but so quickly.
Because he's doing so many interviews. He has what, 3 shows a week, several guests on for each show, and periodically, if you follow him over on X, then he'll send out his stats. And it's hundreds and hundreds of people that he talks to, and it's simply incredible. So it takes a lot, I think, for other folks that may be listening and wanting a few tips. That's how many reps it takes to get really good at something like that. And for a former radio broadcaster like yourself, in order to go on there and be impressed, it's one of those things. It's very it takes a special kind of person to be able to handle that kind of workload and talk to that many different types of people, from the high level executives to the owner operators to somebody that's just a variety of different skill sets that he can hone in on and tap into, which is awesome to see. So it's cool that you got the same experience as well.
It was. The studio was a wild place to be too, being behind the scenes and everything in there. Freightwaves office and my office are, I don't know, the way the crow flies, less than a mile away, a couple blocks in downtown Chattanooga. And so it was wild to get in there. I'd been in the bar downstairs in the freight alley, the kind of like event space, which is also really neat, but I'd never spent any time upstairs in their studio. And so that was also a really cool experience.
Brokering success demands a battle-ready strategy. Thai TMS equips freight brokers with the ultimate battle station for conquering a tough market. With Thai, brokers gain access to a comprehensive platform where rate intelligence and quote history converge on a single screen. It's not just a page, it's a strategic command center designed to help brokers win. Thai equips your team with all of the data they need to negotiate with confidence and allows them to communicate directly with carriers and customers from a simple control base. Revolutionize the way your brokers perform by giving them a competitive advantage with Thai TMS. For more info, go to tai-software.com/battle stations, and we also have a link for you in the show notes to sign up for a demo. What's really cool about that office, and for folks who may not have been there or maybe have, thought about going up to Chattanooga for F3, highly recommend, because it is Freight Alley. It is really cool to see all these different transportation and logistics companies all within sort of walking distance from each other. But that upstairs was originally just like all desk, and during COVID, they completely gutted it and made it just the media experience, which is really cool to see, and sort of it echoes the shift that we've had in sort of the overall, logistics industry. But, back to you and what you do. You have this background in public speaking and radio broadcasting, and then you also have some experience on the freight brokerage side of things. How did all of that experience turn into you joining REPOWR?
I think I learned early on that I was really concerned about delivering value for the truckers. I developed some really strong relationships early on in my career at Covenant Transport when I was managing produce shipments off the West Coast with a lot of my West Coast carriers. And I really just took an interest in their, no pun intended, in their interest, wanted to make sure that I understood that I may be working in an office in Chattanooga at this enterprise level fleet, which was really good experience to learn how the big trucking companies do it. But Covenant sent me to California to manage peak shipments for UPS and some other customers. And I worked in the offices with some of these fleets, and I got to see firsthand, like, the down and dirty, like going out to the yard with a rubber mallet and, hitting trailers to get the kingpins to come loose and sliding tandems, and really getting a firsthand look and understanding of the livelihood of the keystrokes that we hit on the keyboard and how that affects everybody from the other fleets to the drivers and their families. One of my first fleets I worked with, his name was Almond Truck Lines, ATL. They're out of Tracy, California. When I started working with them, they had 10 trucks. And I think that may have been a stretch, but it was about 10. They ran teen reefers, and now they're up to over 500. And I have worked with them for the last 10 years and been able to see them grow. And I have other carriers and partners that I've worked with over the last decade. And I've really just taken an interest and a passion about, a rising tide raises all boats. And so I moved from the brokerage and project management piece. I worked for Covenant's brokerage. I worked in the asset group for a while. I helped build and launch a fuel card carrier services division with Covenant that focused on invoice factoring, focused on generating leads for leasing and getting equipment. We did like routing consultation for preferred carriers. We did fuel discounts. And so I really took that and leveraged it into being able to take this volume-based value approach for working with a large company like Covenant and being able to bring those to our carrier partners so that we could all grow together. And then that carrier services position ended up moving and generating into a full-time factoring role that I had, that I worked with Covenant's factoring group before it sold to Triumph in 2020. And then I worked with their equipment leasing division where I focused on fleets from 5 to 1,000 trucks. I was a national account rep for them, traveled all over the country. And that was the transition from even more about learning about the carrier's business as a whole, looking at financial statements, looking at earnings, looking at balance sheets, and understanding, where challenges are coming in financially, ways that we can work together as partners to help, alleviate some cash flow struggles over here, or making sure that they're having maintenance issues. How can we work to, facilitate more fuel efficient trucks, or how can we look at these trailers, making sure they're spec correctly? And again, just really diving into ways to use the tools in the toolbox to help these carriers have a more successful business venture. And I think from there, I even went and became more fascinated with REPOWR. When I got with REPOWR early on, I was working with them when I was at Tel, and I was just really fascinated by this idea of asset sharing and smart trailer capacity and an elastic supply chain. And REPOWR ended up, providing me with an opportunity very early on. And I talked to my leadership at Tel and Covenant and kind of went through it. And they wished me luck. And so I came and joined REPOWR, but I left on good terms with Covenant. They were one of my first customers here when I got here. They've continued to do very well. And so again, focusing on relationships and making sure that we do right by our customers has been just one of my foundational values that I continue to strive to execute at a high level today.
Yeah, you said something that stuck out to me. You were helping with anywhere from 5 to 1,000 trucks. That's feels like an insane difference between 5 trucks and 1,000. Are there, I would imagine that you're dealing with a lot of different problems with that range, or are they kind of the same? They just scale, those problems scale as you get more trucks.
It's a lot more similar than you think. It really is. I mean, your highest cost as a trucking company is going to be your driver pay. And then close behind, you've got insurance, and then you've got fuel, and then you've got equipment. And depending on how you structure your business, those four are still the top four. No matter if you have one truck or if you have 1,000, those are still why so many people in this industry are focused. You've got driver recruiting that's just always important, making sure you have the right people in the right trucks. You have your fuel cost, making sure you have the most fuel efficient trucks, making sure that your trucks are spec'd for the type of freight that you haul. And so the economies of scale dictate that, how much is saving X percentage here and there. But everybody in this industry is focused on accomplishing the same goals of moving freight as safely and efficiently as they can. And so it really was interesting. It really was interesting when you put it that way. A little anecdotal story I'll tell you that I found really interesting. So when I was working for the factoring company, we worked closely with the leasing company. We would try to help kind of bridge a gap for carriers who were trying to get equipment that may not have the credit quality just right. But if they were with the factoring company, we could, kind of bridge that gap. And Doug Carmichael, who's the CEO at Transport Enterprise Leasing, told me, I'll never forget it. He said, when you work for a freight broker, you're like going on dates with your carriers. You're trying to fill the needs. You're trying to fill some holes in their network. You're trying to build a relationship. And then when you start looking at carriers when they're factoring, it's like you're dating, right? You're helping their cash flow. You're giving them back office support, helping them scale. And then when you get into the equipment, it's like you get married, because at that point you're looking at trade cycles every couple of years. You're looking at the newer equipment. How can you help them scale this part of their business, maybe dial back this part of their business? And you get intimately familiar with these carriers from the time that, they qualify for their first truck to when they're doing 20, 30, 40, 50 truck orders 10 years down the road. And that little tidbit of information has stuck with me for the last few years.
That's a really great way of putting it. And it's a perfect segue into one of the quotes that I heard from one of the REPOWR interviews, that it said a trailer spends about 75% of its lifespan detached from a power unit. So how did y'all realize that this was a problem that needed to be solved? I imagine when you were working with all of those carriers from 5 trucks to 1,000, that was a common issue that was coming up.
Right. So that quote actually came from Great Dane, if I remember correctly. And during the early stages of REPOWR, just doing your market research and learning about, where's product market fit? How do we make trailers more accessible? And it's really not a glamorous story. Our founders, Patrick and Spencer, were both out of college. One of them was working in commercial insurance. That was Spencer. Patrick was working in operations for a flatbed company, Blair Logistics, out of Birmingham. And they both were just talking, and they were like, why are there so many trailers parked everywhere? But yet Patrick, who was managing drivers and making sure they were staying moving, they were always on trailer hunts trying to find the equipment that they needed. But if just an average consumer drives down the road you see parked trailers everywhere. Like, why are there so many idle pieces of equipment, but yet no one seems to have a trailer? And so what we found out was that the trailing asset portion of the supply chain is just even more fragmented than the truckload industry anyway. And a lot of it has to do with telematics, making sure you have the right data in the hands of the people, but also, you know, the standard business operations of the supply chain with your large enterprise shippers require multi-trailers to be staged and drop at their shipping locations for drop and hook freight. And what that does is it creates a lot more capital intensive decisions when you're prospecting and bidding on these opportunities. And so what happens is these large enterprise fleets or even mid-sized fleets, they have to have a 2.5 trailer to truck ratio or a 3 or a 4 to be able to get these contracts they need to scale and manage their business. And so that being said, these large enterprise shippers, your Walmarts, Amazons, Target, Home Depot, these companies that require drop trailers, they're eating up maybe 20, 30 trailers for every couple lanes that a carrier may have. And most of those trailers are going to sit, they may haul a load from Atlanta to Dallas, but then once they get to Dallas, they may sit for weeks. And when they're Atlanta, before they ship, they may sit for weeks. And so you're looking, and the old adage in transportation is if the wheels aren't turning, you're not making money. And so you look at all this idle time of all of this equipment that's just sitting. And during 2020 and 2021, when no one could find a trailer, no one could get one anywhere, the idea was, well, if the money is out there to be made and the trailers are not in a location where they need to make the money, is there an opportunity? Is it scalable for us to make those trailers available to a third party, generate revenue, moving those trailers from point A to point B back into those money-making lanes where the carriers need them? And come to find out, yes, there is an opportunity for that. And we were able to build a system and generate what we've coined the universal trailer network on this idea that if a trailer is sitting and is not where it needs to be, there is someone who needs it and they can use it, generate the revenue they need to, and then drop it off in a location where the asset owner needs it. And we have been able to scale on that for the last couple of years. And it has worked, honestly, a lot better than I thought it was going to.
And you guys call it the digital marketplace for equipment, correct? Mm-hmm. And so yes. with that, what does that look like? Because I was watching a little bit of your demo. It almost looks like, like a reservation system that you can just log in and find equipment that's closest to you or closest to where you need it. And is that it? Is that the, sort of the KISS method?
It is. It operates kind of like a load board for trailers for the open marketplace, where you can log on to REPOWR, search. It's a free account too. It doesn't cost you anything to create an account and log on and search. And so you can log in and search reefers, dry vans, flatbeds, specialty equipment, tankers, Conestogas, things like that. And if you need them for sometimes 2 days, sometimes 6 months, there's all different types of equipment on there. And some of it needs to be repositioned from Los Angeles to Dallas, but some of it can just be picked up and delivered in the same location. And you basically run through a checkout flow very similar to reserving a hotel room. You pick the equipment you want, you look at the price, you pick the days you need it. It's a daily price. You prepay for the first up to 30 days at the time of reservation, but if you only need it for 10, you pay for 10. And so it has just created a more elastic experience within the supply chain to be able to get equipment. If your trailer's in the shop getting wheel bearings replaced and you don't want to shut down for 2 weeks, here's an opportunity for you to grab a trailer. If you're a 3PL and you have an opportunity for a customer who needs some storage trailers, you can come get those on REPOWR and provide a solution to a customer that otherwise would be outside of your scope. If you're an owner operator who's got, wanting to scale up from 2 or 3 trucks to 5 and you're not ready to make a capital commitment because you don't really know what type of equipment you need long-term, this is a short-term solution to let you explore your options, especially when we get into reefer season like we're in now or flatbed season, where some people may have an opportunity from a broker that they've done business with for a while and it's just an equipment type they don't have. But in the freight market we're in now, if this is a solution, you could get something for a little while, see if the rates work for you. All of these things, again, going back to the elasticity, we're just about trying to find creative ways to drive value for the trucker and to drive value for the asset owner, and those don't need to be mutually exclusive.
Are you in freight sales with a book of business looking for a new home? Or perhaps you're a freight agent in need of a better partnership? These are the kinds of conversations we're exploring in our podcast interview series called The Freight Agent Trenches, sponsored by SPI Logistics. Now, I can tell you all day that SPI is one of the most successful logistics firms in North America who helps their agents with back office operations such as admin, finance, IT, and sales, but I would much rather you hear it directly from SPI's freight agents themselves. And what better way to do that than by listening to the experienced freight agents tell their stories behind the how and the why they joined SPI. Hit the freight agent link in our show notes to listen to these conversations, or if you're ready to make the jump, visit spi3pl.com. Do you have to, is it almost like renting a car where you have to return it back to the place that you originally rented it from? Or is that just part of like sort of the universal network where you can leave it where you need to be, or maybe there's a designated drop-off spot? Like what does that process look like?
So every listing has different parameters. A lot of our listings have multiple different drop-off locations. There'll always be one pickup location because obviously that's what you want to see. But, a lot of our asset owners will be like, we've got trailers in Phoenix, we've got trailers in Dallas, Pittsburgh, what have you. And you can elect to drop it off when you're done in Memphis, Atlanta, Jacksonville, Charlotte, Dallas. I mean, there's a lot of times there are multiple options that allow you to choose where you want to drop the trailer off when you're done, and sometimes they can be right back to where you picked it up. It all just kind of depends.
What does the onboarding process look like?
The onboarding process is you go to REPOWR, you click sign up, you put in your DOT number, it populates the fields, you confirm that this is your DOT number, and once that's there, you're set up. That's it. If you want to rent the trailer, you have to pay with a card of some kind, but you can browse the website, see what's out there free of charge, and until you're ready to make a reservation, it doesn't cost you anything.
What about the maintenance side of things? Is that something that you guys handle, or is that still on the equipment owner? How does that process work?
REPOWR will always be your main point of contact for any trailers that you rent. We have an operations team that's staffed to help you with issues. Whether it be pickup issues, whether it be condition issues, or whether it be maintenance issues. Now, different asset owners have different processes that they like to follow when it comes to maintenance. Some asset owners will cover tires if it's not due to driver negligence, or a lot of asset owners will cover brakes, airlines, things that should not fail during a 30 to 60 day rental. They'll cover those things. Some asset owners will cover reefer issues. If they rent a reefer trailer and the reefer unit starts throwing codes or having problems, we have asset owners that'll have you call into a breakdown number. We have some that don't. It just depends, right? If you're a small fleet and you're put one or two trailers on there because you're not using them, you may elect to or to not support with maintenance. And a lot of times the pricing reflects that. And our team will be able to tell you if you call in or if you go to the listing, if it's covered or not, but we'll help guide you through the process. Want to make sure that you have a great experience. Want you to tell all your friends that you had a great experience, right? Logistics is a word of mouth business. So we take that customer satisfaction and experience very seriously. But the short answer is it all depends. And I know that is the most accurate answer, but our team is here to guide you if that is a concern that you have based on your need.
It depends is also a really good marketing answer as well, because there's so many variables that affect it. So people hate hearing it, but it's the truth. It is the answer that unfortunately is the right one the majority of the time. Now, speaking of marketing, what about the sales process? What does that look like for you guys? Because I mean, you're on this podcast. You mentioned What the Truck earlier. So you've been getting out there. You've been doing a lot of sort of, I guess, media appearances. Is that just the main focus of your sales process? Or are you doing a lot of like cold calling or cold emailing in this tough market that we're all experiencing?
Well, what's really interesting about the sales process for REPOWR is when you're playing in a space that people haven't really leveraged before, it's about getting your mission and your brand out there, letting people know what the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Like we talked about earlier, if people aren't willing to tell you about their problems, it's really hard to, discuss solutions with them. And so my and our marketing team's focus from a supplier perspective has been like, hey, we do this. We help you optimize your trailer pools. We help you manage your assets, and we help you do those things while generating revenue into your pocket. We can help kind of take some of these operational challenges and burdens and cost centers. When everyone is looking at their fleet and they're looking at their expenses, we have a solution that can be viable for these fleets if they have a need. And so being able to get your brand out there to say, hey, we do this at a high level. We move over 1,000 trailers a month doing this. This platform works. It is tested. It is true. And it is scalable. And it's really more about just getting that out there. And we want people to hear it. And we're doing a lot of marketing about, testimonials from customers on all different walks of the supply chain and how they've been able to leverage REPOWR, whether it be from shippers that need reefers because they had a cold storage facility go down, or due to weather issues, they may have lost power and they need refrigerated trailers over here. We've worked with contractors that were renovating a hospital and needed refrigerated trailers in the past. We've worked with obviously the owner operators who need short-term capacity. We've worked with enterprise fleets, renting from other enterprise fleets because it was cheaper and more efficient for them to procure a trailer for 4 or 5 days from this location, service their customers' freight, deliver that freight in this location, and drop a trailer off than it was to send a driver on a trailer hunt 100 miles up the road, turn around and come back. And so we just want the supply chain and our customers and stakeholders to know that, like, this is a viable option. It works, and it works at scale. And I think, like I said earlier, when you're trying to bring this type of service in front of people that haven't heard of it, haven't thought about it, and may have worked in this industry for a long time, beating the drum as loud and as wide as you can is obviously the shotgun approach, and we're really leaning into that for the early part of 2024.
Now, can you expand when you have, I guess, sort of a really focused niche product, or is it strictly just growth and brand awareness that's what, I guess technically expansion looks like for you guys?
Expansion for us looks like, it really looks really focused on marketplace density, right? So if you were in Atlanta and you need a trailer, you want it as close to you as possible. So my demand sales team's job is to get as many pieces of equipment as close to these metros as possible, so that the service that we provide, which is this on-demand access to equipment, does not necessitate you deadheading as far as it would be for doing something else, right? And so that's the name of the game, is just marketplace density, to have these trailers where people need them. And again, if you think about it, right, I don't know, what was it? Gosh, someone's going to roast me on this, but say conceptually there's 500,000 fleets in the country. I don't know if that number's right. I'm literally making it up, disclaimer. But if there's 500,000 fleets and the average trailer to truck ratio is 3-to-1, there's 1.5 million trailers in this analogy, which is not true. That's not nearly enough. But if those 1.5 million are not evenly spread out and accessible to the 500,000 fleet, what good is that doing the supply chain as a whole? And so the holistic view is we need to make as many of these trailers as accessible in real time as possible to, again, desegment the supply chain. So that's really where the so-called beating of the drum comes in, is that I need more trailers in these markets like Memphis and Indianapolis and Chicago, where a lot of the freight in the market right now is existing east of Dallas. And so being able to explain how the system works, how the chain of custody works, how the process works for vetting carriers, approving carriers, and all of those things to alleviate, liability concerns, and working through those concerns, and all the legal ramifications of letting other parties and third parties handle your equipment. We have answers for all those that we've spent time and resources on bringing to the table. And again, we just want to let you know that these resources are here should you see an opportunity to utilize our services.
Now, with I guess all of these, expansions or trying to get into different markets and, spreading that through word of mouth, I would imagine that, keeping tabs on all of the different equipment all over the country, you have to have some integrations involved as well. What do those look like? Is it, telematics, ELD, I think is, both of those integrations you guys have within your marketplace?
Yes, we work with various different integrations. Skybits, Spirion just came on board, Samsara, Motive. We're working through a highway integration right now for the vetting
Oh,
process. We've
cool.
just onboarded Kestrel Insights for geofences. And so trailer telematics is the top of the list, right? Like being able, our system to be able to assign assets to that third party, to be able to see where those assets are during the reservation, at the time of pickup, at the time of delivery, all again, ironing out kinks in that chain of custody, all revolve on smart trailer capacity and telematics. And for the renters and the drivers, they have the opportunity to connect their ELDs so that if they are in the market, the system will know based on their DOT number, their ELD is connected, will know where their truck is and can then source the closest trailer that meets their search qualifications. Now, again, you don't have to have your ELDs connected to do that. Your browser on your phone, tablet, or whatever smart device you're using, you can opt in to have that same sort of technology done. But the trailer telematics have really been able to allow the REPOWR system to leverage and grow with the capabilities for the asset owners to be able to track the trailers again while they're on reservation, while they're being reserved. Because these large enterprise fleets that have 4 or 5 thousand trailers, 30,000 trailers, it's not as easy for them to say, hey, I'm really out of balance in this market. And you're like, great, send me 10 trailer numbers and we'll get them listed for you. Well, if those get listed today, those same 10 trailers are probably not going to be there within the next 48 to 72 hours, but the odds are you're still going to have too many. And so being able to have that communication from the tracking devices to know, hey, this carrier has rented this trailer, it's scheduled to pick up tomorrow. Here's what we're showing. You can assign a group of trailers that person can pick from. All of those things and those data sets that are extremely important about driving the efficiency all come with telematics through integrations and partnerships.
I mean, it sounds like those early conversations with talking to customers and figuring out their problems. Sounds like you guys have really, just sort of hit your stride and you're rolling smooth. One of the, the few businesses, or not few, but there, there's definitely some shining stars in a tough market, and it feels like you guys are one of those shining stars. So kudos to y'all. Before, I got a few more questions for you
Mm-hmm.
because I like to end the show with a lot of, I call it the relatable 8 questions,
Sure.
where you just ask a few different questions related in and around, marketing and sales and the supply chain. So you'll allow me to, I'll go ahead and get into those really quick. First up, which you kind of already have answered this first question, but how do you think about marketing when it comes to you and your company?
I think marketing to us and for REPOWR is about showing the value on both sides of the marketplace, showing that there are use cases for renting trailers. There are opportunities where it makes more sense to get a trailer right now than it is to spend the resources to try to source them later. And then also the benefits of supplying trailers, right? Like being a marketplace and facilitating transactions on both sides of the marketplace, you have to have a really solid understanding of when those two use cases are mutually beneficial. And so we spend a lot of time, showing how the REPOWR platform can support owner operators basically pick up a trailer in this location, deliver it in this location 30 days later, and then there's other trailers for you to grab there. So if you've been in the power only market and you get stuck somewhere without a trailer, it can be really challenging and expensive to hit your stride and start being those money making moves again. And we want REPOWR to be a tool in your toolbox to be able to, again, stay in the green, or so stay in the black, so to speak.
That's a great answer. I'm going to write that down as like a social clip because I feel like that's a that's a no-brainer right there. All right, next question is, what's your favorite social media platform and why?
Oh man. So I really love LinkedIn. And I've loved LinkedIn before I really had a reason to be on love and to be on LinkedIn. But I like reading about success stories. I like reading about, again, I am passionate about solving problems, right? And LinkedIn is a really cool place to be able to learn about other people's successes and failures and trials and tribulations, because from a professional standpoint, people love throwing that laundry out there. They love talking about challenges and they love talking about wins. And I think it just helps keep me focused on the problems at hand. And again, my LinkedIn is full of thought leaders in the logistics, transportation, supply chain, but it's also startup, tech, and just I find it extremely relatable. I don't feel like there's nearly as much filler material on LinkedIn as some other sites. Now, again, I do get my guilty pleasure watching gardening and like home improvement stuff on TikTok, and I love cars and anything with an engine and a motor, and so I catch myself watching car videos and things like that. And I am the worst when it comes to Facebook Marketplace. I will waste so much time on Facebook Marketplace looking at things that I'm never going to buy. It's just the digital version of Auto Trader.
Yeah, that's definitely a first is someone saying Facebook Marketplace on this show. So yeah, that's a great answer. All right, next one. What is your favorite SaaS tool that you use every day and can't live without, but it's not your own?
Um, mm, I'm going to be honest on this one. I love Highway. I love Highway so much. I love Highway because I'm a nerd when it comes to, again, looking and vetting carriers, looking at their truck counts as they go up and down, looking at where their inspections have been, being able to see the lanes that they run, looking at, the history, looking at related companies. And it's not so much about like fighting fraud, which is their pitch, and it is a really good pitch. But for me, the way that I prospect and source contacts in the industry, like related companies, a lot of times is another brokerage that's affiliated, or it's a holding company or a leasing company. And for me, being able to look and see what Highway has done by bringing that to the forefront, I find really interesting. I also really like looking at the violations, the DOT violations of who's, how bad were they speeding or were they texting, and being able to see like just, you can really tell a lot about a fleet looking at their highway account based on, what type of violations they've had. I feel like prior to Highway, Carrier 411 is what everybody used. And you would read these freight guard reports and you're just like, man, someone had to cancel a load and they got a freight guard report. And that's really unfair to the trucker who something happened, right? It's logistics. And like a broker getting mad and posting something that's just seems childish. We used to look at and kind of chuckle at, but for the carriers, that wrecks them. Like a freight guard report, no matter how frivolous, especially in today's market, will just wreck them. And I just don't think there's enough oversight there for what it is designed to do. And I think Highway has really come in and filled that void exceptionally well.
So it almost sounds like you're using them as like a sales tool as well, which is maybe
I
like
do.
a sleeper sales tip for all the freight brokers out there. Well, maybe not freight brokers, but anybody else, maybe freight tech in general. That might be a little sneaky sales tool for them in this tough market. Now, one of my other
Mhm.
questions was favorite freight business that isn't your own, but it sounds like Highway is going to be that choice for you, unless you have another mention.
What's really interesting about some of the people that I talk to on the enterprise fleet side, right? Like I've gotten to learn a lot about a lot of the biggest names in the industry, Knight, Swift, Schneider, and again, Covenant, intimately know about them, and being able to learn about, you think all these large trucking companies are the same, and they're not. Their business models, their challenges are all very different. They kind of revolve around a lot of the same core issues, but the directions of where they're trying to go and the mark they're trying to make on the industry and the customers that they're trying to serve are all vastly different, and the mantras that they follow. And I find that really interesting because I know from the small fleet perspective, all these mega fleets are the same. And I had that going into it, right? I think most people would. And so I would just say my favorite freight business that is not my own. Mm. Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm probably just going to have to plead the fifth on it. I don't want to alienate any of my customers, but
Well, that's true
I
too. You
really
can't.
here I am fascinated by Freight Vana a little bit. I think 3PLs utilizing trailing capacity, not shameless plug or anything, but I do find that fascinating as we move into this more connected, technologically connected freight environment. I'm fascinated by 3PLs being able to find ways to effectively deploy equipment in the market. Loadsmith is another one that is really leaning into having these trailing assets to support their customers. And I really think that's going to be the future as we move into autonomous, semi-autonomous vehicles, alternative fuel vehicles. I think having basically these air traffic controller type visuals that are helping manage the power. And I think trailers are going to move into this more kind of locomotive rail space where they're going to become a lot more interchangeable. And there's going to be a lot more opportunities around driving the efficiency around those exchanges.
I love that answer, and I'm sure Freight Vana is going to love it too. They've been a guest on this show several times, so shout out to Don and the team over there and Shannon. Okay, next question: biggest lesson you ever learned in your career?
Mm, yeah. Um, the biggest lesson I've ever learned in my career as it pertains to freight is communication is key. You have to be very mindful of how you're communicating with your customers, and you have to have intimate knowledge about those customers to drive the most efficient communication. I say that with the anecdote of in the brokerage space, in the 3PL space, I had carriers that would just lie to me. And they weren't, it wasn't that they were lying to be malicious. It's just what was the norm for them. If they were running behind or they were, something was not going right, they would give me these, kind of fortune cookie answers. And I was like, guys, tell me exactly what's happening. Let me worry about how to frame it to my customer. I need you to be honest with me. And so I think that driving that and building that trust and those relationships are key. And then being able to communicate effectively, knowing what your customer is focused on. And so from the freight brokerage space, if your customer is really focused on-time delivery and your carrier is saying, hey, they had a flat tire, if that flat tire is not going to impede on-time delivery, thank you for telling me, but I don't need to tell my customer that unless it's going to be a load that doesn't need to stop or is a high value load or something like that. But otherwise, if it's not going to affect on-time delivery, thank you for telling me. I don't need to tell my customer that. Or if it is, I will. But being able to develop that trust with your carriers and your partners and your customers to know that when you're providing a service on either end of the spectrum, you have that relationship to know what they find important and what they want to know immediately versus what they might care to know later.
Yeah, it's something that I feel has more and more, at least over the last couple of years, the importance of carrier relations and establishing those early so you don't have to put your freight on the spot market. So you don't have to go with questionable carriers as long as you're dealing with that open communication with them. And it sounds like you've learned that lesson as well, too. All right. What is a book or podcast that has changed your perspective on something that you previously thought?
Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. Again, someone who has worked, my first job when I was 15 is I sold phone service door to door for Bell South. That was like my first
Bell
real
South.
gig. Yeah, right. The Bell South call to the bullpen for any Braves fans that are listening to this. But my dad made a bet with me. He said that whatever money that I could generate working a summer job, he would double and he would get me my first car. Well, I went and sold phone service and did pretty well at like 15, walking around being clueless. But just going back and thinking about that. Rephrase. Give me the question one more time.
A book or podcast that has changed your
Oh
perspective.
yeah, Chris Voss. And so I'd always try to be a yes man, right? Like you're in sales, you want to say yes and you want to negotiate. And Chris Voss's pretty hardline stance is about how to craft the conversation and realizing that saying no is way more valuable than saying yes. And that just really struck a nerve with me because what it allows you is when you're selling or when you're talking to people about solving problems, you want to be able to solve all their problems. And it is a lot more valuable to focus on the ones that you can solve today and being able to openly communicate that I would love to be able to do that for you in the future, but that's just not where I'm strongest. And if that's really what you're focused on, I would love to connect you with person Y and Z and let us and what I'm strongest with focus on right here. And so that I have found very valuable. And I got to listen to him speak at F3 and I got to talk to him for a little bit and that was extremely valuable. He has a very intimidating demeanor, like on stage, and he's a former hostage negotiator for the FBI, and so he has seen some things. But when you talk to him in person, he's a lot more laid back and he's a lot more academic than you might think, which I found interesting.
Yeah, I think he's a lifelong learner because I listened. He had about a 2.5-hour podcast on the Andrew Huberman podcast, and I listened to that twice now, and it was just such a masterclass on just the conversational techniques in order to have both sides win or not. I mean, maybe your side lose a little bit less on, an important negotiation, but it was really eye-opening enough to where now that book is on my must purchase list, and so that's the next step in my Chris Voss journey. Okay, last couple ones here. Guilty pleasure TV or movie?
Oh, I love Top Gun. I love Top Gun so much. My mother, my late mother, she loved Top Gun. We used to watch it all the time growing up, and I still watch it a couple times a year. The original version, it is my guilty pleasure movie. Remember the Titans is another guilty pleasure movie. TV wise, again, I'm a car nut. I love watching Top Gear and the Grand Tour, which were just staples growing up as a car person. I still watch those. I watch tons of YouTube videos about car stuff that brings me no value. The information that I know about cars, like just looking out in a parking lot, I can tell you way more information about that bring me no monetary value whatsoever, and it frustrates me to no end that that's the information that resides in my brain.
Well, I would argue that it's a good break from your day-to-day job duties, and being able to have those kind of hobbies. It just makes you more refreshed, I think, coming into your day-to-day job. So I wouldn't call it useless, but I'm filled with useless information as well. But I do know that it helps me when I can sort of step away from the grind of this
Hmm.
job, and then be able to relax a little, watch my trash reality TV, and then come back and be like, okay, now I can crank that article out.
Right. Perfect.
All right, last one here, and I might have one if you don't have one, but what is your favorite supply chain or logistics fact? I said it earlier, but just in case, I'll hold it for reference.
The 75% of a trailer's
Yes.
life is spent detached from a truck. That one is a doozy. Um, yeah, I mean that's a really good answer. That was a mind bending answer when I started wrapping my mind around that one. And for the sake of time, I will agree that I think that one is really good.
Nice. Well, that is a great way to round out the relatable 8 questions that I ask on this show. Now, Jake, any last minute things that you want to mention? Anything you feel that's important to talk about? That we haven't already discussed.
I would just think that if you find the idea of elasticizing your trailer pull, either spinning it up, spinning it down, finding ways to drive efficiency within your organization, either to procure equipment or to reposition. If any of this sounds remotely interesting to you, please reach out. I am not a hard salesy guy. I love to talk shop. Another reason why I like doing these podcasts is that I'm just fascinated by the challenges that anybody and everybody faces. My wife calls it my Florence Nightingale syndrome, is that I just have this innate desire to want to talk and learn and help people. And so if you're thinking about ways that you might want to use trailers in the future, that you've missed on some opportunities that you think you'd be curious to know how it might work, please reach out. I will be happy to talk to you. My team would be happy to talk to you. If you offer telematics and you listen to this and you want to know how you can get involved, I'd love to talk to you about that as well. That's a big driving force for the success of our business. But just in general, I'm always happy to talk supply chain challenges. It's just so happens that in this current stage of my journey, I'm focused on the trailing assets of the supply chain.
Great answer. Where can folks follow you, follow more of your work, get connected with REPOWR, all that good stuff?
So we're REPOWR Team on X, formerly known as Twitter. We have REPOWR socials on Facebook, on Instagram. I am on LinkedIn, Jake Battles. REPOWR is on LinkedIn. We're doing a lot of really cool posts right now supporting women for March, really highlighting some of our customers and our employees that are really driving forces behind
Smart.
REPOWR and the community that we represent.
Yeah, super smart for the month of March. So Jake, this was an awesome conversation. We went in a variety of different ways, and you handled it all flawlessly. So thank you again for coming on the show, and this was a pleasure talking to you.
You as well. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot because my
Uh-oh.
marketing team wants me to get a screenshot of us, and I'm happy to do this on the air because you can cut it out later if you like. But I need you to smile so we can get a screenshot because we're going to do a teaser for this. So, in 3, 2, 1. Perfect.
Yeah. Well, that was great. I'm actually going to leave that
Absolutely.
part in.
Perfect.